So, quick outline of our afternoon, everybody. So we are going to be kicking off our wonderful afternoon with Dr. Andrew McCallum, who's here with us for 45 minutes. We'll have a little bit of space in breakouts. And then after the break, we're joined by Dr. Theo Bryer as well, and space for some questions at the end of the day for Theo. So as we make our way through this afternoon, if you have any questions whatsoever for Andrew or for Theo, we're going to ask that you pop them on a Microsoft form, and Lisa is now going to pop that form into the chat for you. So do make sure you've got that open and handy so that you can refer to that as we go through the afternoon. Okay, we'll pop that in a couple of times for you as well, I know, as people are still joining. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Andrew McCallum, who is the director of the English and Media Centre. And for 15 years, he worked as an English teacher in London comprehensive schools, mainly, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Ackland Burgley School in Camden. Andrew, have I got that right? No, absolutely not. How do you say it?
The G is silent, Ackland Burley.
Oh, thank you. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Thank you. So after that, Andrew's been a course leader for the PGCE in secondary English at London Metropolitan University, and is the author of Creativity and Learning in Secondary English, which I know some of you have already been looking at and referring to, and has a doctorate with a focus on social justice as well. I know that's very close to all our hearts here at Teach First, and explores that distribution of creativity in the English schooling system. And at the English and Media Centre, he works primarily on Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, and has been absolutely instrumental in the centre publishing best-selling anthologies of diverse literature for secondary students. And that includes things like the literacy shorts, diverse shorts, iridescent adolescence, I love that tongue twister, and poetry playlist. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing so that Andrew, you can share your slides. Welcome, it's lovely that you can be here.
Thank you, Gemma, for that introduction. Hello, everybody. And just while I work out how to share, here we go. Okay, so we're going to think about creativity and social justice. As Gemma said, I've got a doctorate in creativity, English and social justice. And what that did was it looked at creativity as a kind of material quantity, if you like, that students have an entitlement to. And it looked at how that was distributed in different kinds of schools. So if you're in a private school, were you getting something in terms of creativity that was very different to students in state schools? And was there difference depending on the kind of state school you were in? So I won't reveal what the outcome was until we get further on. But in doing that, you can probably sense that what do I mean? You'll need to work out what I mean by creativity. So I don't really mean being creative. I don't mean like, you need to dance to demonstrate what this book means. I actually mean that creativity is a kind of core function of language itself. Okay, and here's 3 quotations to help us think about that. And our business is language, isn't it? Whether we're teaching literature or language, our business is language. And language operates in a kind of balance between creativity and constraints. If you make the constraints too severe, you can't really express meaning beyond something quite formulaic that everyone else has done before. If it's too creative, then it might lose sense. And different kinds of writing require different kinds of options, whether it could go for more creative or more constraints. I would argue that teaching, certainly in the last 15 to 20 years, has veered towards the formulaic and constraining. And I would ask whether that is happening more in schools where the students are from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, or is it happening more in private schools? We'll move on to that, as I said. But just to explain the quote. So the first one is just to get you thinking that the language is never fixed anyway. It exists in this, as Volosinov says, ceaseless flow of becoming. So every time you open your mouth and words come out, they're in a different context to when they were used before. And what that means is that language is constantly in a state of change and flux. And actually our teaching needs to accommodate that. But we are not teaching students to be AI automatons to say the same thing as every other student in the class. In fact, if you get a series of bits of writing from your class and they look really similar, you've probably not done your job correctly, unless it's a very particular kind of writing. But most writing in English, you actually want the 25, 30 examples in your class to be different. And that in itself is an element of creativity, because if it's not different, I would argue there is no thinking that gone into what's going on there. Okay. The second thing is this notion that all your students, when they come to class, nearly all of them will have language already, unless they've got significant kind of cognitive deficits or particular learning disabilities. They all have language, and they're all creative with language. We all know that when we start talking to people, puns happen, jokes happen, playfulness happens. So that's your starting point with creativity in English lessons as well. What do you allow students to bring in? How do you allow them to actually use their own language in order to develop further and take on different forms? And again, I would ask, are we doing that as much as we should be doing? Are we doing that more than we used to? Is that happening more in some kinds of schools than other kinds of schools? And the bottom one is my kind of motto for English teaching. It's from a wonderful Zadie Smith essay called Speaking in Tongues. Flexibility in language leads to flexibility in all things. That would be my aim for any students I was teaching English. Make them flexible, competent, but flexible users of language, and to recognise that language use needs that element of flexibility. We'll see what a great quote from that essay as we move on. So it's a function of language, but creativity is actually also a function of literature. Now, you started teaching, I'd say probably, I use the word dog days of the kind of cog-sci push in education. And why I say dog days, I mean that because it needs to kind of move on for English teaching specifically. We've basically had imposed on us a way of teaching that is very much suited towards the kind of science and mathematical aspects of learning. And really, in my opinion, I think most people who work in the field, is not particularly well suited to English, where there is this need for creativity and for difference. There is not one set way of doing things. Language is not learned in component parts that are chunked up. Actually, there's a great mass of language out there, and our job is to funnel it down. Imagine you've got the funnel upside down and you try and stuff things down and everything comes out. That's a bit like the model we're trying to do at the minute when we chunk things up too much. Actually, we start with the funnel properly way up. We've got all this language, and our job is to allow students to filter it through that funnel. And there's a great book here, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, Literary Understanding and Literature Instruction, Envisaging Literature. And it really sets out a powerful case for literature being a particular way of thinking, and we need to make a strong case for that. And it's very different to scientific thinking. Yeah, it doesn't follow the same patterns, it doesn't follow the same logic, because primarily it's to do with possibility thinking. Particularly with novels, particularly with fiction, when you open a book, the book has got it wrong if it tells you what's going to happen. The whole point of reading is it's an unfolding process. You have to activate your thinking to think about what you've just read, what's gone before, and what might happen next. And the skill of the author is giving you enough clues to make you want to read on, but not telling you. So you're constantly re-evaluating, rethinking, envisioning what literature is. So that's the kind of creativity of literature. It makes you think when it's doing it right. And that means in the classroom, we need to have text that allows students to think, and we need to have a pedagogy that helps them to think. If you just tell them what a book's about, you're not doing a job. Even if they can recreate that in an exam situation, get their marks, well, fine, in the end of year 11, tell them what they should say in the exam. But if you're not doing that, if you're doing that throughout their other years at secondary school, you're doing them a massive disservice, and you're not encouraging them to think. And thinking is central to creativity. And this is my absolute, I said that Zadie Smith was my kind of byword for teaching. This is the one that conceptually gets me excited. So I'll read it out. Vygotsky thought and language. Thought is always something whole. So think of that funnel at the top. Something with significantly greater extent and volume than the individual word. So again, we won't go into teaching vocabulary, discrete words, decontextualized, absolute waste of time. But language is a whole. It's not discrete individual words. Over the course of several minutes, an orator frequently develops the same thought. That thought is contained in his mind as a whole. Just think of anything you know lots about. Might be a particular kind of music, might be a book you've just read. It doesn't sit there in your head as individual words, does it? It's all there contained. You probably all read Christmas Carol, yeah? It's all there in your head. It's in the massive funnel. And if you have to write about Christmas Carol, you have to fine tune it and let it come out. And you need creative ways to do that so that you get different responses all within a kind of set framework for Christmas Carol. So it's not just about creativity, it's about constraints as well. It doesn't arise step by step. It's not component parts through separate units in the way that his speech develops. What's contained simultaneously unfolds sequentially in speech. So it's jumbled up in your head, and then your job as an English teacher is to make students able to put it in a logical sequence, but a creative logical sequence as best they can. And this is the famous quotation: thought may be compared to a cloud shedding a shower of words. So your students their heads are clouds. You want them to be clouds that are absolutely full to bursting with ideas. And then your job is to let them shed that shower of words, perhaps in quite a chaotic way to start with, and then rearrange it so it starts to make sense. So that for me, along with Zadie Smith, are my two. If people say, what you're trying to do as an English teacher, try to make them flexible users of language, and I'm trying to make them bring logic to this kind of shower of words in their heads and develop that shower by helping them to think. So that's where the possibility thinking and literature comes in. The more your thinking is stimulated, the more you have to write, the more you have to say. The more you say and the more you write, the more your thinking is stimulated. So it's a two-way creative process. Now, so I'm absolutely convinced that there are really, really strong arguments for creativity being at the core of English teaching. In my world, in a sense that language is a creative medium. And so we're working with the creativity of language with our students. By all means, do creative activities, but they might work on material in particular ways. But that, for my argument, is slightly different. And it's quite a tough argument to make. The current national curriculum and all the kind of documents that go with it from 2010 to 2024 don't mention the word creativity anywhere. Prior to that, in the New Labour era, creativity was everywhere, although we'll see in a moment, not necessarily in a good way for English. But I put this there because the Black Papers was the start of the system you're working in today. The Black Papers was an attack on the comprehensivisation of education by right-leaning writers, politicians, and in this particular quotation, a child psychologist. And you can see there's this nonsense, false dichotomy of creativity and behavioural standards. So for some reason, this writer thinks that the alleged breakdown of society is all because there's this vogue for, and it's used as scare quotes, it doesn't really exist, for creativity. And what does that mean? It means bad spelling, bad grammar, and the crudest vulgarisms. Well, that's not what creativity is at all. It's actually using language in multiple ways to its kind of full richness and its full extent. So there are people who will just sneer when you mention the word creativity, and I almost have stopped using it because, and not today, but it does make people sneer with this kind of nonsense, kind of backlash way of seeing things. The flip side is when New Labour came into power, they commissioned a huge report into creativity. It was published as an actual book. This just predates mass internet usage. And this book, believe it or not, it's a big A4 size book, sold over 100,000 copies. So there was a real appetite for creativity in schools. It was reporting to creativity in schools, effectively. And it's got this kind of quotation at the start, very much linking creativity with kind of 21st century economic growth and success for the country, which is fair enough. It's a decent way to think about creativity. Again, it's not really what I'm about. I'm about creativity as an entitlement for young people in their English classrooms, and asking which kinds of students get that entitlement. Because when we actually look into this document, well, this is just some background really. So the document seems like a good thing, and it was a counter to this terrible thing. But actually, among politicians, they've maintained mainly a distance from creativity. So Michael Gove, this is a quotation from Question Time. You've got to admire his speaking. He does speak in full sentences. It just comes out of his mouth. But this is why we have the kids learning those grammar terms in primary school and being tested on them in a decontextualized fashion. even though there is very, very strong evidence that the explicit teaching of grammar makes students' writing worse, doesn't improve their writing. That's not to say don't teach students grammar, or that grammar isn't another entitlement in English classrooms, but do not mistake the logic that being good at grammar will make you a good writer. Yeah, or being taught grammar explicitly will make you a good writer. There's absolutely no correlation. But Gove kind of puts it like this, you know, creativity is all very well, he's effectively saying, but you've got to master a body of knowledge first before you can be creative. Well, there's a certain logic to it. You can't do things without knowing things. You can't act on stuff without knowing the stuff. But our students in our lessons in English are not empty vessels. They come with language already. And so you've got the material already there. They are not novices. The novice expert framing that we have in education, it doesn't work for English. Because if your learning is the next step, you've already got a load of stuff with English, and it's just getting to the next step in English. So you're not a novice. You're an expert as a 9-year-old, and you'll be an expert as a 10-year-old. And you're pushing yourself forward, pushing yourself more. So actually making them learn all those things just gets in the way of them actually doing things with the language they already have and developing it further. But it's a powerful argument. And so when in opposition, Tristram Hunt, who was a New Labour Shadow Cabinet Minister for Education in 2015, took on the clothing of Gove. This is from a book review of the person who authored All Our Futures. The uncomfortable truth is there are large swathes of the English education system that require more, not less, uniformity. If all our pupils could reach some basic minimum standards of literacy and numeracy, Robinson rightly makes the case for the rigour of creative learning, but we always need to guard against the soft bigotry of low expectations, the worrying trend of play and expression being adequate for working class pupils, while leaving the tough stuff for their better peers. You might recognise that phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations, first used by George W. Bush and used by every Conservative education minister from 2010 to 2024. They love it because what it essentially says is it's all very well for you well-meaning liberals who like things like creativity to give them to kids, but you're actually doing them no favours. You just need to give them the tough stuff. And Hunt falls into this trap or uses it rhetorically to push Labour's position, the worrying trend of play and expression being adequate for working class pupils while leaving the tough stuff for their better peers. Well, you know what? You know who gets the self-expression and the play more than working class children? Children in private schools. So the reality of the world is back to front. This is what my research found, but it's what is there in huge, large-scale research projects as well. It's in the, we don't report creativity in the PISA rankings anymore. Gove and Gibb refused to put Britain forward for those. But when it was reported back in 2011, those things, those creative things are going on in English classrooms, but really only significantly in private schools. Yeah, so we've got a discourse that says schools are still giving this wishy-washy stuff to state school children, particularly working class ones, and the private schools are doing the rigorous proper stuff, when actually it's completely the other way around. You're in schools in all kinds of areas, they'll be doing all kinds of different things, but you'll know what you're seeing in English lessons. And I can almost bet my bottom dollar. It might not be brilliant, might not be good stuff, but it won't match what Tristram Hunt is saying there in all bar a very, very few cases. Right. So creativity might make a comeback. Now we have a new government. Might make a comeback. There's definitely going to be more creative subjects, or they're going to get a comeback, music, drama, etc. But will we get a comeback for English? Will English be deemed in need of more creativity? I'm slightly skeptical, but I'll get to that later. But why was it sidelined in 2010? Well, it links all the way back to that 1971 Black Papers document. That was the guiding light for people like Michael Gove, that collection of essays. So he's absolutely wedded into that notion of creativity as this kind of dangerous force that, you know, you can't actually give children until they're ready for it. So is he misguided in that, or, you know, and thinks instead you've got to focus on basic skills, etc. I mean, why is it an either or? You've got to focus on basic skills. You've got to be creative, I would say. Or is it something a bit more sinister? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I do know that if you look at the evidence structurally, stopping socioeconomically disadvantaged students from doing particular things in English is not going to help their outcomes in English. Yeah, you know, there hasn't been a massive narrowing of any attainment gaps in those 14 years. And we know that the creative industries are increasingly populated by people from particular kinds of backgrounds. Yeah. And we also know, we do know, it's not spoken loudly enough, that the more disadvantaged the area in which your school is based, the narrower your curriculum is likely to be. Doesn't mean it has to be or it is, but it is more likely to be narrow and be devoid of treating language as a creative medium to be used in particular ways, depending on where your school is. And if you want to go down the conspiracy line that it's on purpose, then there are reasons to do that. So Stephen J. Ball, brilliant sociologist working in education, this is in my doctorate. So he points out that policymaking might be looking in the wrong place in addressing itself to social disadvantage as a freestanding problem. In other words, well, it's just the way the world is. There are socially disadvantaged people and socially advantaged people. He would argue that actually it's structural inequality built in, and that education is designed to build that in. And one of the designs, if we take his logic forward, is that if you restrict access to socially desirable resources such as creativity in certain kinds of schools, then that's going to be picked up more in other kinds of schools. Because the reality of private schools is they operate in a market. They have to convince people, convince parents, to pay large amounts of money to send their children to those schools. Now, there's a report came out just last week that says, in terms of GCSE results, when you strip out socioeconomic disadvantage or advantage, students in the state sector are actually performing slightly better in maths, science, and English GCSEs than the private school counterparts. So you'd be wasting your money sending them there if it was all about GCSE results in those three subjects. However, it's not the case for other subjects, and it's not the case at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, and A-level. Now, you're in schools. How much time is spent on getting students those GCSE results? It's absolutely everything in particular kinds of schools, most of the state sector, all of the state sector. And so we've got a system that is so focused on a particular way of doing English, maths, and science. It's getting them through those hoops, doing well in terms of getting them a particular grade linked to their background, but it's ignoring everything else. And actually, I'll be arguing that in English classroom, it's also ignoring lots of really, really valuable stuff. But there's every reason to believe it would actually help those grades improve further. Certainly, if there is, a well-run school with good behaviour management systems in place as well. And by the way, if you read that report, it's definite in terms of the statistical output that they found in quite a large-scale study, that maths and science students are doing better in the state system at GCSE than in the private system, if you factor in socioeconomic disadvantage. It's not the case with English. There's a tiny positive one for the state schools in English, but it's statistically too small to be valid, so they're doing about the same. But we can't ignore these things. State schools are doing lots of good things. But the reality is, the more socially disadvantaged your school, the fewer opportunities for creativity in English and in everything else, I would say, in a large number of schools. Not every school, a large number. It's there in my small scale research, which there is a link to there. It's there in very large scale survey work. There's an excellent report from 2015 commissioned by the then National Union of Teachers, now the NEU. And it's there in large scale meta studies. So there's the PISA report that I mentioned earlier, which was reported on by journalist Lisa McInerney, because PISA reports about that long. It's really difficult to actually unearth things in them. Okay, so this is the reality. And you might think, well, so what? It's all about getting kids their GCSE results. Well, I don't think that's social justice. What about, whatever school you're in, there are really talented students getting really great results, and students who are really struggling as well. They all deserve a particular form of English, I would say, as well as the right to become competent, flexible users of language, creative readers. But the two don't have to be incompatible. For some reason, they become very much incompatible in many locations. And look what happens when you talk to teachers in these schools. So teachers in the most disadvantaged school, the school way above the national average for free school meals, etc., all those markers. When I said to them, can you provide me with an example of creative practice in your English lessons? They genuinely couldn't come up with anything. It's a tough one, really hard to think of one. I can't. And I'll reach for different subjects. Well, I've got more freedom in my drama subject, studio, because that's a creative subject. Media has allowed children to be really creative. And then when I went to kind of mixed intake comprehensive, so students from all kinds of backgrounds, the teachers were less hesitant, but interestingly, they often reached for things that weren't about their actual lessons. Oh, God, I don't think this is going to be particularly creative, but so they're apologetic for what they say. And then another one was when it was a taster lesson with year 5 or year 6, knowing we don't have to get any work out of them at the end of the day. It's more about the experience. So somehow they're framing actual English in their context as not creative. Let's look what happened when I asked the same question to teachers in a private school. Oh no, first of all, this was in the really disadvantaged school. This was fascinating. This was a teacher who taught for nearly 40 years, and it was her last week of teaching. And she was just full of what I've called rage at what she felt she was having to do and what she wasn't able to do. In other words, she couldn't be creative in her lessons. I think we should be encouraging children to think for themselves, to see things from other people's perspectives. These are really interesting framings of creativity, aren't they? Which is where your imagination comes in. If you're just reinforcing the status quo, you're not getting, I mean, sometimes it's uncomfortable getting kids to challenge things, but I think you're not going to get a just society, social justice, a democratic society by just feeding kids ideas about what they should think and how they should react to things. I think there's too much prescription. And she was visibly angry when she was saying these kinds of things. Meanwhile, the private school teachers found it very easy to come up with what they considered to be creativity in their lessons. Here's one. Along the way, studying war poetry, they wrote their own war poems from a particular perspective. Or when doing Canterbury Tales, they did things like the Dustbin Man's Tale. So you've literally got someone at a really expensive private school being allowed to take on the voice of a dustbin man in their lessons. Whereas the students in the state schools weren't taking on the voice of anyone. They were just taking the voice of school creative writing, by and large. School critical writing when writing about literature. They're obviously doing some creative writing as well. So it's not, I'm kind of exaggerating things slightly, but they weren't doing these things. They absolutely weren't. With Curious Incident, had to write from the mother's perspective, father's perspective, write as Christopher at the end of the story. So these are all things that go on in all kinds of schools, but it was just really, really telling that it was absolutely going on in this kind of school, and in the other kinds of schools, it was really, really limited, or people felt they needed an excuse to do it rather than it was absolutely central to their practice. In relation to that, I've got a little puzzle for you. Who gets to be creative with language? Well, actors do, don't they? These 6 have all taken on multiple roles. They can do all kinds of voices. They can take on different voices. Eddie Redmayne's currently an assassin in Day of the Jackal on Netflix. Damien Lewis is currently Henry VIII in Wolf Hall. I'm sure the other 4 are up to all sorts of things. My question to you, I won't use chat because there's loads of you and we haven't got ages. My question to you would be, who is the odd one out in that list? So just in your own head, you're thinking, oh, I wonder who it is. And the answer is Benedict Cumberbatch. So now you might be thinking, why is he the odd one out? Well, the answer is Benedict Cumberbatch went to Harrow School. And the other 5 all went to Eton School. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm being selective in choosing these people, but I think it's, and because I could have obviously had 6 state school students there who are great actors and doing interesting things. But why I put it there is because the more advantaged the school, the more their English curriculum encourages students to take on different voices and their wider curriculum as well. It's not narrowing them down to speak in one voice, standard, some weird notion of standard English that we have in schools. It's encouraging them to kind of blossom and take on all kinds of voices. And this is where we come back to Zadie Smith's essay. because she starts this essay speaking in tongues. She talks about her experience of growing up in Willesden in northwest London. And if you haven't read N.W. by Zadie Smith, I recommend you read it as an English teacher, because it's an amazing novel, really in large parts about language, and the way she herself uses language in that book, or is able to use language, is kind of a masterclass in linguistic flexibility. And their characters play with language and are playful with language. But her essay starts by saying, look, I used to speak in one way, in one tongue, in Willesden, northwest London, you know, working class girl, going to the local comprehensive school. And then I went to Cambridge University, and actually I lost my voice. I took on a kind of middle class voice, and actually my northwest London one, it's actually gone. And she really regretted that. She could write it, but it didn't emerge. She didn't feel it was part of her identity. It didn't come out. And she makes a really strong argument for a world where we try and preserve those voices, but allow students to take another voice as well. And she wrote it in the heady days of Obama just being elected. And again, I recommend reading his first autobiography, Dreams from My Father, or listening to it, because he narrates it himself, if you want a sense of someone who has that flexibility of voice. And she recognizes it. She says it can do Jewish male, black old lady from the South side, white woman from Kansas, Kenyan elders, white Harvard nerds, black Columbia nerds, can't see everything for the pictures, women, churchmen, security guards, bank tellers, and even a British man called Mr. Wilkerson. She's making a case for power now. If we go back to previous slide. So power is invested in places like Eton, but Eton used to teach its students to speak with one voice, the voice of power. What I'm now suggesting is it recognizes that power does not lie in using just one voice. Power lies in using multiple voices, and the socially just education would recognize the creativity of language and encourage students to use all kinds of different voices. And she said that's why it was so thrilling to have Obama as president. Yeah, because he could speak his people. He could speak the people who voted for him. And interestingly, the essay says the one voice he didn't use when campaigning was Black American male, because he was defending against being associated as a Black American male, terrible as that sounds, but that's what she makes clear in her essay. But she says his first kind of big TV appearance after becoming president was on Oprah, and he switched into that discourse almost immediately. And you'll have all seen him do it multiple times since. He's a kind of ventriloquist. Again, a model for how we want our students to use language, all kinds of different discourses, language discourses. So it's not just me kind of with a hobby horse about this. It's there in really clearly in lots of research. So some research links there that link creative approaches with improvement in attainment across all ability ranges. So this isn't for the high attainers, this is for everybody, but with socioeconomic disadvantage comes not doing so well at school. So again, when I say the more socioeconomically advantaged you are, the more you're getting to experience language as a creative medium, and less so the more disadvantaged you are. That also applies to the more high attaining and more low attaining you are. So low attainers are being denied the very thing that will make them better at using language, put on endless intervention programs that make language just something very, very dull, dry, formulaic, and it's not working, is it? Because those students aren't making huge leaps and bounds. Helping them progress is really, really difficult, but maybe some of the approaches that treat language as a creative medium would help. So there's a great book by Robin Alexandra about dialogic teaching. Brilliant that oracy's back on the agenda. There's going to be lots of this, a really good read, lots of research quoted in there. There's an oldish large-scale study that looked at discussion-based approaches in English classrooms that link those to high levels of attainment. But this one in 2022 is a clincher. Burgess et al., Bristol University, with Nuffield funding, large-scale study. They sat a load of researchers in GCSE English classrooms and in GCSE maths classrooms. They weren't intervening, they were just watching what was going on. And then when the students got their results, they tracked back to those lessons and correlated what was going on in classrooms with better outcomes. And what they found in English was that where there were moments, it doesn't have to be the whole lesson, where there were moments of dialogic interaction in classrooms, students taking charge of the learning, putting things in their own words. Where that was happening in lessons, there was a direct correlation with GCSE, better GCSE outcomes. Didn't apply for maths. With maths, it was doing lots of tests. But we seem to be in a system where students are doing lots of tests in all the subjects. And actually, we need to look at our subject and think what works best in English. And there's a large-scale study that shows it's giving students the moments to talk about material in their own words and to reframe it in their own words. It also helps with memorization, which is a big push in school. If you talk about something or write about it in your own words, you remember it better. And then there's another large-scale, older piece of research there, which again looks at dialogue. Okay, so some large-scale studies. We're just gonna, I've got sort of 8 or 9 minutes, so I'm gonna do an activity with you where we're gonna think about reading as a creative activity. You've got the first 2 lines of a poem. It has been on the GCSE paper, this poem, so you might have come across it. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south. Now, language is a creative medium, so that is triggering things in your head. Things are happening. And if I was teaching this to students, I would not want to tell them what's going on or what you might be thinking, because I don't know what they're thinking. I want to get in their heads. So what do these 2 lines make you think? What's going on? What might happen next? Are people, can one of the Teach First people nod if they're able to write in chat?
They can use the chat, Andrew.
Yeah,
yes.
brilliant. Okay, so if I just kind of come out, shall I come out of the can you use chat while this is on the screen and I can see it?
We can, yes, you should be able to see the chat too.
So just write down in chat what you think's happening. Give you a minute to do that. So in our own silent chat-based way, this is dialogic teaching. You are engaging with many more answers than you ever would in a classroom about what might be going on. But in reading them, in skimming them, you will see that people have very different ideas to you that none of you actually know, because how could you unless you've read the poem before? But you are seeing that language is a creative medium, because that combination of words has made you think and led to all these different outcomes. And it's just such a simple way to get students. Again, once you've looked at everyone else's and yours, you'll be much more invested in reading the rest of the poem, because you do want to see what happens next. And actually, if you want to take it into the lesson, you can talk about, some of you said the man must be nervous because crossing the street. If you put that in a piece of writing, maybe there's some jeopardy. It's raining, maybe you can't see too clearly. But some of you have gone to this reminds me of Northern dialect because of the way people might tell a story. Others have picked up on the North and South. Maybe it's a kind of road not taken kind of poem where there's different ways of doing things. So we're actually, as well as just having a bit of fun, would be able to help students see that looking at something like 2 lines of poetry can involve really, really close interaction with the text and coming up with ideas, possibility thinking. Yeah. Some of you will be actually in the many that I've skimmed. I don't think anyone's got it absolutely, and there's some quite far left field ones. But lots of, if you did a word cloud, things like uncertainty, doubt, hesitancy would definitely come up. Okay, so let's just have a look. I'm not going to show you the poem yet. So we're just at the stage of introducing the whole poem. So we could do that in lots of different ways. You could ask the students to write the rest of the poem, a bit too much, I'd say, but you could certainly ask them to write the next 2 or 3 lines of the poem. Because again, they're having to interact with those words. And when they then read the poem, they'll get a much clearer sense of what's going on because they've got something to compare it about. Oh, I did this, but they've done that. You could give them the poem line by line, or 2 or 3 lines at a time, so they can see that reading a poem, just like reading a novel really, is an unfolding process, that the meaning evolves, the meaning changes, it's creative. The writer deliberately orders it in a particular way to trigger your thinking. That's the whole point of literature. It's got to trigger your thinking, or it's worthless. Yeah, it's experiential as well. You need to be immersed in it. So the second one's good for that. Or they can just have the whole poem themselves, and actually, you know, be confident with the class to do this. Might be older students, an anthology poem they've met for the first time. They write down their own ideas, and they might be really, really basic. And if you've got students who are really struggling, you might say, write down your favorite line and say why you like that line. You know, just anything to get them into the poem. Compare it with 2 or 3 other people. Talk about it as a whole class. You're starting to get some ideas about what the poem's about before you tell them what the poem's about in your version of what the poem's about, because it's only one version among others. And oops, or they actually look at the poem, write down some thoughts, but then you put it away. We're going to do our carrying with our novel now. And then they return to it the next lesson. And what you'll find is, what you'd find if you did it yourselves, you'll see the poem slightly differently the second time that you read it. You might do that 3 times. You might have 3 lessons during the week. You're going to spend the first 5 minutes with this poem in silence, just absorbing what's going on. And you're going to reflect on why your thoughts about it change each time. Because language is a creative medium. It's flexible. Meaning is different each time, just like words coming out of your mouth are different each time. So here's the poem. I'll just give you a moment to read the poem. Okay. Now, with a class, you would never just read it that quickly and then say do something with it. But our very, very final thing, again, to show literature as a creative medium that will make you think different things. You've seen the whole poem now, so you must know what it's about, mustn't you? Because, well, you've read it, you've all read the same words. So you'll all come up with the same answer, won't you? But I want you to write in chat a single sentence, no more than, say, 15 words long, this poem is about. And I guarantee not one of you will write the same as anyone else. Yeah, this poem is about. It's just a really simple way to show students actually how all literature requires you to think and work on it. In a classroom situation, some students might think it's absolutely wrong, but then that's a great formative assessment tool for you. You can see they can't handle a simple poem, but actually you'll probably find lots of good answers you can build on to get a strong meaning of the poem. So our final activity then, this poem is about, and then I'm going to say goodbye. So try and frame it so you actually use the words this poem is about. Right. And look, there are commonalities. Of course there are. More than one person's going to mention parenthood or being a father. But even then, you've framed it slightly different to everyone else. A man's love for his child. The importance, some of you have gone for more thematic-based aboutnesses. The importance of love and kindness in the world. We need to protect the most vulnerable in society. Tenderness and care for others. Unspoken fears. A father worrying. Love. That one, more than one person could have said that, couldn't they? This poem is about love. I don't think they have. It's about existentialism. It's about fatherhood. Yeah. I mean, you might want to go through the fine-tooth comb and find that 2 who've said the same thing. But essentially, we've proved there, haven't we, that language is a creative medium, that literature is a creative medium, that whenever you allow people to interact with it, new knowledge will emerge, will be created, if you like. So the activity itself, I think it's a creative one, but it's not that notion of creativity that involves a bit of chaos and a bit of juggling things and doing things really, really weirdly. It's really standard. We use this one loads, so you more than likely come across it before. But it's endlessly useful with a text. We call this a low threshold, high ceiling text. So pretty much all students can step into that text and understand it on some level, but you can take it all the way up here if you're a really high attaining student. And if you're not, you can still make progress in working on this poem, hearing your ideas listened to by others, hearing their ideas, hearing your teacher's ideas. So it moves away from that model where it's the teacher doing everything first and dictating how you respond to something. It starts with the notion that students have language they can read, they can understand, they can generate meaning, and then we'll work with that and we'll see what the poem's about. Okay, there are several other slides, but I'm actually going to, I'm doing another one of these in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to say goodbye. So I hope that was useful. Thanks very much for listening. And I will stop the share so you can get your screen back.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming along. I know you have to run off and we'll hopefully send you some questions your way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that in mind, everybody, hopefully you can now see my screen as a reminder that if anything from what Andrew has just talked about, there was lots there around creativity that has sparked a question or a thought that you'd like to put to Andrew, please do feel free to either use the QR code on the screen, or I think one of my colleagues will pop the link back in the chat for you as well. I know a few people have already asked some really great questions in there, so thank you so much. So lots of food for thought, and hopefully what we are recognizing is there are some links back to our first training day. You might recall that we looked at creativity as one of our core sessions, and in particular we looked at creativity in the English classroom, the barriers that exist, the pedagogies that enable us to be creative, and we drew on the work from Lorna Smith's book, that creativity in the English curriculum, and we looked at those three areas on the screen there. We looked at oracy, reading and writing, and drama within oracy as well. So just give you a second just to recall some of those on the screen there and have a think back to the creative pedagogies that we've looked at. And in a moment in the chat bar, I'd just like you to note down some of the strategies that could be used for any of those pedagogies on there. Maybe something that you've actually tried over this term would be wonderful to hear. Have you had a go at any of these? What has creativity looked like so far in your classroom? So I'm going to give you a minute and then I'd love for you to share. So don't press return just yet. Type it in and then just give it a moment. Okay, when you are ready, you can press return. How have we been using creativity? How have we used any of those pedagogies so far in the classroom? Do have a read of each other's. Great, Olivia already pulling on some of the free writing that we looked at in process writing in year one, role play, drama in a focus for Shakespeare. I think our session 2 with Theo is really going to expand on some of that as well, which is great to see. Oh, I like that. Students wrote their version of a script for the Capulet Ball. That sounds fantastic. I would have loved to have been in that lesson. Whooshing, yes. Really getting the pupils to think about their body movements and how they stand when it comes to specific actions. Lots of drama here, which is wonderful to see, particularly around plays. Oh, I really like this peer review, collaboration, planning strategies as well for drafting Gothic horror stories. Lovely. Diaries to find the voice of a character. Really nice to see the dialogic teaching, but also this collaborative, symmetric talk that we're bringing in as well. Wonderful, some really great ideas here, and I'm hopefully when you're thinking of what you just heard from Andrew and you're looking at some of those pedagogies there we shared from Lorna Smith's work, you're perhaps thinking about some more of those creative opportunities in the classroom, whether that's group work and discussions, drama for understanding language, approaching plays, enacting monologues, reading for pleasure, diverse texts that you might be bringing in to coincide with other texts that you're reading. All of those play a really important role of supporting pupils to have, I like Andrew's words here, possibility thinking with the text that we have in our classroom. So what we're going to do now is move you into a breakout space so that you can have a talk with each other around drama in English as a thinking about drama in English, because we're really going to focus that with Dr. Theo Bryer in our session after the break. Okay, so we're going to ask you to discuss what place does drama have in your classrooms and school, and where have you already used elements of drama? I've seen some of that in the chat already. In your classrooms to support students already to start engaging with the text. Okay, so we're going to pop you into breakout spaces now for maybe the next kind of 8 minutes. Lisa, is that about right? Wonderful. And maybe this is an opportunity to just think about that creativity as well and how that's looking so far. Great. Okay. If there are no questions, I'm going to check in with Lisa. Are we good to go?
We are. There are just a couple of people that have had to join in and out since I made them. So if you don't get moved into a breakout immediately, you will get popped into one. So you might just need 2 minutes just to make sure that everyone can get into their rooms.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And we'll see you all back very shortly.
Lovely. It's just got about 5 or 6 people. I'm just popping you into a room now. So you should get an invitation in a moment to join that room.
I've paused the recording. I think that's everybody. Thank you, Lisa.
I've just got a couple that aren't quite in their breakouts yet.
Okay.
One of my trainees is nipped to the bathroom.
No problem. They might get a quick notification when they get back, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes for them to join. That's fine.
Emma, is it still recording now?
No, we're paused.
Oh, it looks like it's still recording on my screen.
It's probably because I've not pressed stop and I've pressed pause.
That'll be right. Okay.
Just a
Welcome back, everyone. If I can just ask you to pop yourself back on mute, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back to us there. Just a reminder to pop yourself back on mute. Thank you. And we would love to hear in the chat what you've been discussing. So it would be great to have some headline figures there in the chat just before we head into our break. What were you talking about when it came to creativity? What does that look like in the classroom? What barriers did you talk about? Anything come up from Andrew's conversation or piece that he presented to us there? So just give you a minute to share that in the chat, please. Thank you for starting, Ellen. Absolutely, that misconception around creativity leading to a lack of boundaries and poor behaviour. Just a reminder, everyone, if you can pop yourself back on mute, that would be fantastic. Thank you. I like that, Chloe, and I think Theo's going to pick up on a little bit more of that about drama being part of the lesson. Really great. Finding space at Key Stage 4, absolutely. Great comments around oracy as well, and bringing that in to your classroom, that dialogic talk. Oh, the very visual element as well. Yeah, definitely, of plays playing a part. How do you bring that into the classroom space? Okay, I like that. The opportunity potentially of trying something new. But then the challenge of avoiding those further misconceptions. Really great to hear some of these. Wonderful. So hopefully you have taken quite a bit from the session that we've had already with Andrew. And as I've said, if there are any questions that's come up off the back of that, do pop those in our form, because you will be able to, or will put those to Andrew for you and get some responses. But I can see that this has sparked more conversation and discussion around creativity in the classroom, and perhaps addressing some of those misconceptions that we've had around that. Oh, Catherine, I really like that. The situation model feels like a dramatization in our heads. Yeah, how can we leverage that? That's a wonderful thought. Yeah, Jade, I agree. How do we find space, if it's not already there, to build that in and implement that? And them not being an add-on. Absolutely. Yes, that they have purpose in supporting pupils, that there is real learning that takes place in those creative tasks. Really great. I like that, Olivia. There's an inclusive nature as well around drama and creativity in the classroom. Really great. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, I think we are heading towards a break now. So a reminder of our agenda. I know we're heading off here maybe a minute before, but in hope that you will come back promptly for our second very exciting session with Theo at 2:15. So we would ask you to stay on the call. You've got a break now until 2:15. If you can come back a minute or so before we are heading towards a break, a minute early, that would be wonderful. Leave cameras off and stay on the call, and we will see you back at 2:15. Thank you, everybody.
And make that 2:15. So if we can just start coming back to the virtual room, if I can get some little thumbs up from people in the reactions, just so I can see that people are back with us and ready to start the second half of the session. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Lovely. Always enjoy people's emoji choices in the afternoons. Lovely. Okay, great. So welcome back. Thank you already for your fantastic engagement in that first session. For any of you who weren't able to get away from lesson or had a bit of a delay joining us for our first subject expert and Andrew's session, please don't worry. A gentle reminder at this point, we are recording today so that we can capture all of the wonderful words of wisdom from our subject matter experts today. So please don't worry if you did miss any of that content. There's also been lots of really great requests in the chat for the resources and links that have been recommended today. So just a reminder that there will be a SharePoint folder that has the resources, all of the slides available for today. And after this call, once it's been processed, we will also send you a copy of the recording. So if there's anything you feel you need to revisit or to re-engage with after today's seminar, then please know that that is there for you as well. Finally, if you are just rejoining, and just to make sure that people have seen it in the chat, you will just see a copy of our form. So if you do have any questions for Theo as we move through the second half of today, please do pop them there. And we're hoping that we'll have sort of around 15 minutes at the end of today, hopefully, where we'll be able to share some of the questions and to pick some out so that you can post some of those to Theo. So please do use that form if you have any questions that you would like to ask today. So with that in mind, I am really excited to introduce our second speaker to you today, Dr. Theo Bryer. Theo is currently the subject lead for the English with Drama PGCE and also works on the MA in English Education at UCL's Institute of Education, or IOE. She is the co-author of Drama at the Heart of English, Transforming Practice in the Secondary Classroom with Maggie Pitfield and Jane Coles, which you will find listed on the Tallis list for Module 4. And I know that some of you have already accessed as part of your assignment work. So really, really excited to be able to draw those strands together today. Theo taught in schools and colleges for around 20 years before joining the IOE, and her thesis was about how assuming a role can support learning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over Theo for part 2 of our subject afternoon to share some fantastic expertise on drama in English. Thank you so much, Theo, and welcome.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here, especially after I've seen all that you had to share in the chat after Andrew McCallum's really, really good talk. So I can tell that you are already engaging in all kinds of aspects of drama in English, and you're finding this approach meaningful. And we will talk about some of the ideas and ways of working, and I'll conclude the talk today with a task that will involve you doing some shared planning, and then we can feedback and talk about it. So thank you for that introduction. So my name's Theo. It's actually short for Theodora, because you might think it's a man's name. I get this quite a lot. And yes, and I've been here about 10 years and taught before that, taught many subjects actually, and was always interested in the cross-curricular dimensions of drama and role play. So my central argument in this presentation is that, oh, here's our book, by the way, and I think you have access to it via Tallis. It's actually 25% off in the Black Friday sale on Routledge, I noticed. But if you can access it via online versions, that'll be cheaper for you. So my central argument in this presentation is that drama should be integral to the teaching of English. The concept of drama in English and the classroom examples that I refer to all come from this book that we wrote. And I wrote it with Maggie and with Jane. Maggie was, I was more the drama specialist. Maggie taught both throughout her career, and Jane taught English and was always interested in using drama in her English classroom, particularly in the teaching of Shakespeare. So we came, and we were all teachers for years and years and have been around a long time. So we came from different, in some ways, different terrains with different interests. And we've brought this together to really look at some of the theoretical background to why more, oh, sorry, to why drama should, to support our argument about why drama should be at the heart of English. But also with lots of practical examples drawn from our classrooms and others. So our hope is that our drama and English pedagogy re-establishes English as the creative, imaginative and interactive subject that Andrew McCallum was talking about. And, you know, we are at a new juncture currently with the curriculum review. There are some signs, as Andrew was saying, that oracy is going to be recognised in the future, and that the aspects of creative learning that have really been leaking out of the curriculum since all of the new Labour interest in creativity may find their way to the centre again. So we focus on the value and inclusive nature of educational drama practices in the reading of literary, dramatic and multimodal texts in the English classroom. Our focus is particularly on literature. What is drama in English and what isn't it? We argue that it's first and foremost about learning, that it builds a bridge between literary study and students' own experiences and cultural understandings, and thus that it's inherently inclusive pedagogy that is engaging and meaningful. And a lot of you in your comments were reflecting on how inclusive these approaches are. And that's why it's so shocking that currently they are not, they are denied students, particularly those students with SEND, for whom they can open up a world of meaning and understanding. So drama in English is particularly valuable in the ways that it draws learners into the world of a text, seeing situations, events, or characters from different perspectives and collectively negotiating new understandings. We think it's a sustainable pedagogical approach that can be frequently integrated into classroom practice in small ways, in ways that help shift and spark the imagination. So it really isn't reliant on resources like a large workshop space or any kind of drama or acting training or on your part. It isn't about you feeling like you have any kind of actorly skills or need to have. That's not what it's about. So drama in English can just as easily be done at desks and utilises the pedagogic artistry that's already part of an English teacher's skill set. An example of the skill set is when we read aloud to a class in such a way as to bring a text to life, thus heightening our students' engagement with it. This is something that I'm sure you do as English teachers. Drama in English also draws on role-playing skills that we all and that young people naturally possess because we played when we were children. And as Raymond Williams observes, drama and role play are part of the daily rhythms of ordinary life. One of the ways in which meanings and culture are constantly being made and remade rather than merely transmitted. So there are three key theorists. This isn't too long, this section, but I'll just explain because you may be interested and you may have heard of these theories. But there are three key theories whose work we have synthesized and developed through our collaboration. And I like the fact that it was three women and we're three women. So there's the influential reader response theorist, Louise Rosenblatt, who's probably familiar to most English literature graduates. Literacy and learning specialist Myra Bars, who sadly died recently, but whose work was such an inspiration to us. And it's very accessible. So if you see, she used to run the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education and has written a lot about different aspects of creative learning and reading. So if you see anything written by Myra Bars, please grab hold of it. And of course, renowned drama educationalist Dorothy Heathcote. I don't know whether you've heard of Dorothy Heathcote. We just did a presentation at the annual Dorothy Heathcote conference, which is this fantastic 4-day conference where we spend a lot of time working in role and thinking about learning. So Dorothy Heathcote was an amazing teacher. Somebody particularly, if you're at all interested in drama, please do look her up. There's lots of material online. You can see videos of her working. Although coming from different disciplines and perspectives, we noticed that all three of these provided separate accounts of living through and enactment as powerful concepts, which for us serve to underline the natural affinity between reading, learning, and drama. So Louise Rosenblatt's reader-centered account of encounters with texts, which is called reader response theory, as you probably know, provides our overarching framework. Significantly, Rosenblatt envisages the interplay between text and reader as a reenactment of the text. This is what she imagines happens in people's heads as they read and make sense of the text. She describes the way in which the reader infuses their own voice, their own body, their own gestures, in short, their own interpretation into the words of the text as they have a kind of readerly encounter with it. Dorothy Heathcote's ideas about drama's relationship to learning enrich our understanding of the reading process that's derived from Rosenblatt. For Heathcote, it's vital that learners will work from inside a situation with all the in-the-moment thinking that that entails, and very often brought about through really brief but significant moments of role play that involves plenty of space for reflection. There may be moments of drama, but she always stops to reflect and to think about what's happening and why. For us, this simultaneous inside-outside perspective is a central facet of drama in English, involving interplay between the creative, the affective, and the critical. So Myra Bars highlights how role play and writing in role make use of resources that all learners naturally possess, which comes back to the idea of play and she kind of extends these ideas to think about writing. She argues that enactment and role play are a fundamental mode of learning in English, simultaneously involving social action and symbolization, processes of meaning making. That's why, for Bars, she thinks the act of reading should be considered drama in the head. The act of writing, all forms of writing, involving assuming some kind of role and thus should be considered drama on paper. And physicalized role play, she recognises as a crucial part of the whole class reading experience, one that recognises the body as a key interpretive resource. So the examples of classroom practice we include in the book suggests that working in this way not only encourages students to think creatively, but also to develop a critical perspective. And we contend that this applies equally to A-level study as it does to GCSE. And we draw on this theoretical framework to argue that. I should say that all three of these, well, Myra Bars and Dorothy Heathcote work together. So there is a kind of interplay, and I've worked with Dorothy Heathcote and Myra. So it's a kind of network of understanding and many years of trying things out. And this is something that you can step into. This is really about teachers being creative themselves and having a little bit more agency than currently they might feel that they do in classrooms, developing the theory, developing these ideas that are very open, really. So here's a great, I love this picture. This is from a project that we did about teaching Beowulf, and it involved some photography and film as well as drama. And she's playing Grendel's mother, one of the monsters in Beowulf. So in our book, we offer plenty of examples of drama that can happen without much fanfare, with an invitation to wander or imagine or a shift into a storytelling tone at the beginning of a lesson. Drama in English brings what Cecily O'Neill calls a web of meaning or a hinterland into play, including an implied past, present, or future of the characters in the text that you might be studying. I should say that Cecily O'Neill is another person who's another inspirational person who writes a lot about working with texts and drama, and similarly somebody else to look up whose work is very readable. So, thinking about this idea of a web of meaning around a text, what happens if the characters from A Raisin in the Sun or A View from the Bridge meet up 10 years after the events of the play? How can we enlarge the scope of canonical fiction by offering opportunities to enter the narrative from the perspective of a minor, the perspective or point of view of a minor or a marginalised character? That of Grendel's mother from Beowulf, as shown here, so who's a monster, fantastic monster, but she has no name. She's just called Grendel's mother. Or someone who witnessed or overheard something, or has something to report. The female domestic staff in Robert Louis Stevenson's male-dominated Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for example, the maid who witnesses the Carew murder or Hyde's housekeeper. What do they have to say about what they saw or what they thought about the strange events that they were on the edges of and that they witnessed? There's lots to explore there that students that might involve students in role play that will direct them back to the text to check and to think, where was the maid sitting when she saw this? And what, you know, Hyde's housekeeper, how did she, what did she think when she took this job on? Anyway, those kinds, particularly in the canonical texts that are taught a lot in classrooms at the moment, that idea of bringing different voices in, exactly as Andrew said, I think is really key. So the small scale research project, sorry, there's lots of words on this slide, but you don't necessarily need to read them all because we'll come back to it. The small scale research project that we draw on in chapter 4 on reading and role in our book involves my student teachers experimenting with Heathcote's role conventions in their English classrooms. This was 2 years ago, but they are continuing to experiment and report back to me. And then I've got last year's cohort involved as well. So this is a kind of ongoing project. And we've been considering how the effects of this approach reverberated in aspects of their students' reading and writing, as well as their speaking and listening. So I thought it was interesting in the chat that people were mentioning speaking and listening. And that's kind of natural place that you think drama might reside or be associated with. But we also argue that it's very important that drama is related to reading and writing. So, as I said, Heathcote worked with Myra Bars, and we saw potential in the way that Dorothy Heathcote's practical suggestions offer opportunities for students to bring their understanding to a literary text and to enact performances of meaning, as Rosenblatt puts it. So these role conventions, and you can look them up, as I said, they're in Signs and Portents, a fantastic article that you can probably just find if you Google, although it's in her essential writings. They encourage a class to focus on interpretation, to attend to the nuances of the text, not only in the form of the written word, but as it might be embodied or implied in other significant ways. So Dorothy Heathcote was interested in what she called the movement into the symbolical, that the role as image initiates. So in these suggestions, a lot of them are quite image-based. So she thinks about the role in the form of a portrait or discarded clothing or objects to represent a person's interests. And what she's interested in is asking students not to interact with the actual person, but with the meaning of the person, with what's significant about a person that you bring into the space through someone in role as their portrait, or through some objects that you say, I wonder who these belong to, or through some clothing that you say, this is strange. I wonder why we've got this tattered bit of silk or whatever. There's lots of other examples here of a letter or an account written about a person. So these prompts to the imagination evoke the presence of a character from a text, maybe, or if you're doing creative writing, it might be a character that they invent. And they're intended to encourage students to develop a specific relationship with them, nurtured through careful examination of material things with a view to reading the signs. You've probably used images in your classrooms a lot. This is a kind of 3D idea. It's nice to feel things. It's nice to actually pick things up. It's nice to look closely, or it's nice to take on a role yourself as a portrait. So what does this conception of drama in English look like? I'm going to take you to a recent classroom that I've been in. This is my student teachers, and we've been considering the ways that time is rendered in chapter 8 of Great Expectations, where Pip describes first setting eyes on Miss Havisham. So here's the chunk of text. Let me read to you, but I've got to get my face out of the way of the text first. So this is from chapter 8. This is when Pip first sets eyes on Miss Havisham. And I'm just going to read In an armchair, I've just started just second sentence of the second paragraph. In an armchair with an elbow resting on the table and her head leaning on that hand sat the strangest lady I have ever seen or shall ever see. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace and silks, all of white. Her shoes were white, and she had a long white veil dependent from her hair, and she had bridal flowers in her hair, but her hair was white. Some bright jewels sparkled on her neck and on her hands, and some other jewels lay sparkling on the table. Dresses less splendid than the dress she wore, and half-packed trunks were scattered about. She had not quite finished dressing, for she had but one shoe on. The other was on a table near her hand. Her veil, but half arranged, her watch and chain were not put on, and some lace for her bosom lay with those trinkets, and with her handkerchief and gloves and some flowers and a prayer book, all confusedly heaped about the looking-glass. It was not in the first moments that I saw all these things, though I saw more of them in the first moments than might be supposed. But I saw that everything within my view, which ought to be white, had been white long ago, and had lost its lustre, and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride within the bridal dress had withered like the dress, and like the flowers, and had no brightness left, but the brightness of her sunken eyes. So we looked at this passage, and actually we'd done some other activities where we looked at different film versions of this moment, and we thought about time and how time's rendered in this passage, and we'd actually got the students up to do a kind of timeline, because when Pip sees her, in this moment he's remembering seeing her, and he's also remembering that his memories kind of went in all different directions as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It's a fascinating bit of you know, that really shows how Dickens works and how he draws you into these moments, these significant moments, but also amazing in terms of the introduction of this extraordinary character. So we thought about Heathcote's role conventions, and we decided that we'd work on Convention 5, that the presentation of the character in the form of a portrait. So one of the students volunteered to assume the role of Miss Havisham in the form of a portrait, a moment suspended in time. So we were thinking of kind of a picture on the wall, this to, you know, as if she were shown like this. So the rest of the class were engaged in arranging a suitable backdrop, drawing inspiration from this you know, how it's this writing, which you know, is very descriptive about all kinds of objects and things around her. So we didn't have that many things. We had a few bits of material, but what they did was that they found things like a lanyard that was kind of representative of bits of jewelry, whatever they had. They laid it around her, and they told her how to sit, and we tried out different ways that she might sit in this portrait. So the task, what was important in terms of thinking about learning in English, is that the task sent everybody darting back to the text, to this bit of text, to check which aspects of Miss Harrison's appearance and her background were particularly salient. So her head leaning on her hand, the remnants of a veil on her hair, that we found some little bits of tissue, that as Fiona adjusted her posture to kind of accommodate them, seemed appropriately transformative. We then thought, what should we do next? And we thought about Convention 2, which is interesting, but it's the idea of a little moment of film or video, just a little moment where she'll come to life. Something that can be stopped and started or rerun. So we said, okay, come to life, but just for a moment. And something really magical happened, because yeah, something just sort of shifted in the room as Fiona came to life, and she became Miss Havisham, and she picked up the things that the students had laid around her, and she picked up the thing that we thought would look like a mirror, and she looked at herself. because the placing of the objects had involved the whole class in a process of a design, it was a kind of motivated engagement with the text. Her transformation was felt particularly intensely by all of those watching, because we'd made her, and then she came to life. I mean, it's such a simple thing to do, and yet the room just fell silent, and it was as if that we were in the presence of this extraordinary character. So this simple activity took us to the heart of the novel through an encounter with Miss Havisham and through an encounter with her strange history as it's represented. It was represented here with all of these objects. And it had profound and memorable effects, something that I argue should have a place in all English classrooms. So here's some images of this character. Fiona didn't look like this because she didn't have costumes or real props. But because we had made her, and then, you know, thinking about these other representations of that character, we felt, you know, there was some ownership over the text. We'd made our own version. And we could critique these other versions and think, oh, no, we didn't want it like that. No, we wanted Fiona to look less hot, shocked, or less tired, or, you know, so that this was an interpretive process that we'd all been engaged in collaboratively. So in reflecting what to do next, we wondered what would happen if someone were to take her hand and to bring her to life from the portrait so that she could speak to us. I noticed that quite a lot of people mentioned hot seating in the chat when you were thinking about things that you've done in your classroom. This is related to what Heathcote calls convention number 1, the role actually present in a naturalistic way. And it's often a favoured strategy in English classrooms. Heathcote was keen to engender a more dramatic and human form of interaction than firing questions at an individual, suggesting that a class should also be in role when they meet a character like this, particularly one who would keep her secrets as close to her chest as Miss Havisham would. So firing questions at Miss Havisham makes no sense. And why would the class do this? But if they were in the collective role of a housekeeper, maybe, or of Jaggers, her lawyer, charged to secure her safety and her fortune, then this becomes a much more engaging and meaningful encounter. In our book, we report on the ways that the student teachers found of making hot seating a more productive engagement in this way with fictional characters, providing further opportunities to understand the context of a text. From the teacher taking on the role themselves, which is another way that you can communicate some of the ideas about the character from the text through taking on the role yourself, to moving into the kind of more nuanced improvised dialogue that I was mentioning. So in relation to Convention 15, objects to represent a person's interest, Heathcote is clear that a teacher should be selective and foresee implications in the chosen objects. So we think about this quite a lot. So if you're making a character bag, for example, which is something that we quite often suggest our student teachers do, so a bag that belongs to a character with some objects inside, it's important that those objects are carefully chosen if you want to direct the learning in a meaningful way. So this isn't a random thing. This is really about getting your students to think. And I would also argue that, and I think I'll just come out of, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I'd also argue that the objects can pose more significant questions if the students are given something like this to fill out. So this is a police report, which enrolls the students who are responding to whatever it is that is shared with them, so that they're enrolled, they interpret the objects from the point of view of thinking, oh, there is some significance to them, and I'm thinking like a police person. The police report provides the role, frame, or perspective that guides the student in making sense of the materials that they're presented with, fostering an attitude or degree of criticality, enabling a teacher to shape the student's learning. This comes back to Myra Barr's point that I think about a lot. Role is another way of focusing, of taking up an attitude to your material. Another example of the difference that it can make to enroll the students when presenting them with materials comes from one of my students, student teachers, Asha, who offered her pupils a copy of an authentic handwritten draft of Wilfred Owen's poem, 1918 poem, Mental Cases. And she asked them to make inferences about the author's state of mind when he wrote it. She recognised that enrolling the students as staff at Craig Lockhart Military Hospital, where Owen was staying when he wrote this poem, had the potential to provide a more contextualised and more motivated engagement with the evidence of shell shock that informs the poem. It's a much more imaginative and much more focused encounter than just looking at a handwritten draft. So as I said, last academic year, my student teachers continued to experiment with drama in English. This included embodied dramatic interaction, but with the same clear focus of how the drama could fit into a scheme of learning. So some of them moved away from the drama, the role conventions that are not really about, you know, clearing back the desks and making students do small group work or anything like that. They're much more focused and small scale. But some of my students did bigger things, and they thought about how bringing the bodies into play, what effect it had. And this Emma did a whoosh, which was a couple of you were talking about, that whoosh thing to introduce students to the narrative of a play. And she introduced her students to Midsummer Night's Dream, narrating the plot and asking students to step into the different roles as she got to them and to show the attitudes of the characters towards each other briefly as she did so. So I'll show you what she said about the activity. This is what she reported about it. She said, I knew that the physical embodiment of the characters helped make the plot more accessible and memorable, because the next lesson, students could not wait to relay the plot back to me, enthusiastically referencing certain classmates' performances. For example, one student exclaiming that they knew Demetrius definitely did not love Helena back because of the way another literally aired her and turned away when she spoke. So in Emma's classroom, the peopling of the text with their peers appears to have generated a sense of ownership over the play, as the characters' intentions and relationships were animated by the kinds of physical responses and gestures that pattern students' day-to-day interactions in very memorable ways. Drama is very memorable. And I think this is a good example of it. Well, here's another example. And this looks like a little bit more like, oh gosh, there's no desks. This is a moment of embodiment. But I watched this lesson. It was an extremely successful English lesson. So another student teacher, Sophie, engaged her 11 to 12-year-old students in enacting a battle. Actually, sorry, this isn't from the lesson, but it's representative. And in fact, they were in their classroom and they moved back a few desks, but they didn't have that much space. But they enacted a battle through still images and slow motion as an aspect of their reading of Michael Morpurgo's Arthur, High King of Britain. Sophie encouraged the pupils to draw on vocabulary from the novel in reflecting on what they saw in their peers' still images. So this was important. She said, so what can you see here? And, you know, and she encouraged them to use some of the descriptions of the battle from the novel in looking at their peers' images. She was impressed when she discussed memories of the activity with one of the students later. And he recalled words like brutal as he reenacted his swooshing sword moves. And the brutal, which was one of the words that had come up in the text. For him, this effective dimension appeared to support his recall of aspects of the text and the language associated with it. And this is an observation that is supported by research that Jane Coles and I have done as well. Someone's singing. Hello? Are we waiting to listen to the singing? I quite like the singing. Okay. Anyway, in O'Neill and Rogers' account, let me know, can you hear me? All right, yeah.
We can, Theo, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I suddenly felt like, oh, I was in a strange bubble with singing in the background. In O'Neill and Rogers' account of the relationship between drama and reading, this is Cecily O'Neill, who I was talking about earlier. This is a brilliant an account called Prying Open the Text, a good article that I suggest you might want to look out for. In their account of the relationship between drama and reading, the authors explain how the process heightens the active role of the reader in the interpretive process, creating a bridge between the abstraction of the written word and the student's understandings. This sharing of authority with the authors of a text becomes more inclusive when students are offered the opportunity to create their own collaborative readings through embodiment as well as through words. I'm going to show you some images now from work that we've done over 10 years or more. So we think that the motivated signs made by the body or bodies in live drama accrue further significance when framed on screen. As we've discovered doing the kinds of filmmaking activities that we've been experimenting with for well over a decade and that are represented here. So this may seem a bit of a leap because I was talking about small moments of drama, but I do want to talk about filmmaking because the ways that we do it involves iPads, phones, really simple, taking images, maybe little bits of moving image and just editing them together. When we started out doing this, there were iPads in classrooms. There was a school that had no exercise books that just used iPads. That is probably not the case, although I know there are Chromebooks around. And you can't use phones in classrooms anymore, but you can set these activities for homework. And I would really, really recommend it. And if you can get hold of iPads, editing is so simple, and students absolutely love doing these kinds of activities. And we've also found that using cameras to interpret literary texts offers students really significant opportunities for students to insert themselves into narratives and to critique and subvert the representation of characters, authoring their own readings that feature themselves clearly visible in role. So that, they're studying texts that have a lot of wide characters, but if they put themselves in role in these texts and they can see themselves, it makes a difference. The technology also offers students the opportunity to direct the gaze of their audience and to draw out the potential symbolism in a close-up on an eye, or gesture, or a prop. Editing is a fantastic process in terms of heightening awareness of signs and of the representation of characters, opening up opportunities for critical analysis in accessible ways. So this was about the raven, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and they just looked outside the window and they saw a bird and they could make this black and white, and then it becomes it becomes the raven and it becomes something Gothic. So that kind of making strange that can happen when you look around from a particular frame, when you point a lens at it, is so exciting. And it really, again, this is an act of interpretation. It's an act of criticality. And the design work, we think, that Heathcote recognises as an aspect of role creation can alert students to the formal and stylistic dimensions of a text or a genre like the Gothic. The props that we chose as a stimulus for the drama and media production based on The Raven were suggestive as well. They were suggestive of the Gothic elements of the poem. So they were kind of helping the students to tune in. These aesthetic considerations facilitated the processes of this, what we sometimes call transmediation, so that students engaged in this, they adapted the poem into the medium of drama and film, generating their own readings through the process. So you might guess, what do you think that? Let's have a breather because I'm starting to cough. Why don't you put in the chat what text do you think this might relate to? What Gothic text? What does it remind you? What do these images remind you of? Any ideas if you put that in the chat? Oh, yeah, brilliant. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, this is so good. Yes. Yes. Great. It could be any one of those, to be honest. Oh, that's brilliant. It's so nice to hear to see you out there. I was brilliant. Honestly, I've done drama and filmmaking on most of these texts. They all lend themselves so well. Frankenstein, brilliant. Telltale Heart, fantastic. Yeah, Woman in Black, oh, Jane Eyre, all of these texts lend themselves to drama and filmmaking. This was actually, most people said Jane Eyre, that's so interesting. Yeah, because it's women, but it was actually Jacqueline Hyde. I mean, this is the transformation, a moment of transformation, the moment of transformation. Turn of the screw, brilliant. Yes. Oh, you're getting me excited thinking about all of these possibilities. So I would suggest that if you're teaching any of these texts, when at the end of it, at the end of this talk, you're going to think about possibilities for drama. So remember the possibilities in working with these texts. So yeah, this was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and a moment of transformation that was captured through photos and a little bit of moving image. So Heathcote suggests that role helps the students to do and the teacher helps them to see. The notion of a lens that role play brings to the interpretation of a text from a moment from the text is metaphorical, but it is clear that these forms of live and recorded dramatic action are a powerful tool in the development of critical understanding and insight. So drama also supports students in developing their own writing. And as we all know, in English, there is a great emphasis placed on writing. What I'd like you to do now is think about the types of writing that you routinely ask students to undertake. And if you could put that into the chat, what do you routinely ask students? What forms of writing do you routinely ask students to write? Yes, analytical or creative, language analysis, yes. Yes, analytical. Yeah, Peel, Peter. Yeah, free writing, nice, free writing. Persuasive writing, yes. Analytical, comprehension. Plot summaries, critical writing, yes. Analytical, what, how, why. Yeah, that's interesting. My student teachers were talking about how what, how, why is now replacing PEE. Slow writing. Book review, what, how, why, yeah, free writing, mind maps, nice. Analytical, short answers, yes. Yeah, piece paragraphs, yeah. Diary entry, free writing, lots of writing and role, lovely. This is so nice. Lovely, language paper 1 or 2, yeah, of course, the creative writing. And language paper 2, that kind of, well, the essay at the end of language paper 2, that's kind of writing in role, really, isn't it? So, yes, a lot of this is a kind of literary criticism or literary crit, this analytical type of writing. And we often ask students to respond to their reading of literary text through this literary analytical paragraphs, as you say. In drama as well, I know that some of you do teach drama at the moment. They often have to write about their own and each other's work in a kind of analytical way, or to think about how moments might be interpreted. So yeah, there is an undeniable focus in secondary English on critical writing, and that is driven by the rigid requirements of the national curriculum and the GCSE exams. However, we propose that as a response to literary texts, creative writing, such as writing in role, is just as valid and intellectually rigorous as literary criticism or PE paragraphs. And you might think about it in this way: creativity requires criticality and analytical thinking, and the critical is reliant on a creative frame of mind. And therefore, we think that moments of practical drama activity in English lessons can provide students from Key Stage 3 to A-level with opportunities to express themselves creatively and in ways that helps them to develop their critical insights in memorable ways. So I'm going to focus on an example of how drama activity can bring reading and writing together. We're going to think about this teen novel. I don't know whether or not any of you teach Stone Cold. It was a Key Stage 3 text that was taught quite often in the past. So a drama activity based on an early incident in Stone Cold. This was from some research that Maggie did. And she was watching drama in English classrooms, and particularly writing and role. So a drama activity based on an early incident in Stone Cold allowed the students that we observed to write while in the thick of the action. They spontaneously improvised a farewell at a railway station between Link, the main character, and his older sister, Carol. Link is a young and vulnerable homeless boy who's moved into London from the north of England, and he feels quite abandoned by his sister and his family. To draw the students into this make-believe moment and to add urgency to the conversation between the siblings, the teacher unexpectedly made the station announcement that the train to London would leave in 2 minutes from platform 10. And this meant that the farewell had to be truncated and rushed. Some things that the brother and sister wanted to say to each other were inevitably left unsaid. The teacher then took on the role of the narrator to move the students into a piece of writing and role that happened as part of the action. So those in role as Link imagined they boarded the train and they wrote a letter to their sister expressing what they hadn't had time to say, while those in role as Carol returned home to write their diary entry. This move straight from a little moment of role play into writing gave immediacy and impetus to the writing. And you know, many writers, young writers, have difficulty getting started, but when you do a little bit of drama like that, it really tips them into the writing nicely. So it makes the writing task urgent and enjoyable, and it ensures that the drama kind of carries on in the learners' heads as they write. So they were using the writing not as an end in itself, but also to think about the narrative, to consider the characters' circumstances and the language, and also the language that they might use. Teresa Kremin and her fellow teacher researchers, if you're thinking about creativity, Teresa Kremin is a very good person to read. They describe this as seizing the moment to write. And for the teacher, switching from station announcer to teacher of narrator was simply an extension of what English teachers do all the time when reading louder fictional text, for example. They use voice and gesture to create atmosphere and tension, to bring the characters and settings to life from a novel, and so that it might infuses the students' writing, and it does. And significantly, this moment of drama took less than 5 minutes, and the writing was really quite quick. The conversations took place standing next to desks rather than sitting at desks, suggesting the physical constraint of a crowded station and the awkwardness of this farewell. The teacher involved in this research, and we use the term desk drama to describe this type of activity. A later role play based on Stone Cold drew upon the dramatic tension of a key character in the novel, hiding something important from both the other characters and the readers. So a key character is actually an undercover reporter posing as a homeless teacher. So this led to some writing as a newspaper article, but it was informed by in-role conversations that the undercover reporters had with their editors about the type of story that would appeal to particular newspaper readership. This brought up interesting questions of stance and bias. And this, in contrast with the last example, was a very crafted piece of work. So the authentic context of the drama fired the students' imagination and commitment, and it afforded them agency in determining what they wrote. And being writers in this way motivated them to develop what we call a writerly disposition, a sense of audience and understanding as well. Understanding that newspapers are far from neutral in their reporting, for example, and understanding of the text, of its content, and of the messages in some ways, what the author was trying to say through their writing. So we think of drama and writing being an inclusive practice, and we offer plenty of other examples of how writing in role can be inclusive, giving voice, as again, to marginalised characters. I'm going to give you an example from an A-level workshop that we did with A-level English students. And the workshop was about King Lear. The students explored the scene from involving the character of Goneril, when she's represented as a joint stool. When she's represented by Lear, she's called a joint stool. Sorry, I'm just going to give you a little bit more detail about this. So in the 1608 quarto of King Lear, King Lear mounts a mock trial of Goneril, and she's absent. So she's represented by what's called a joint school, and she effectively becomes a silence character. And we invited the students to write back in role as Goneril. And from this, a range of perspectives and complexities emerged about how Goneril is represented in the play and as his daughter, and the misogyny really around that representation. So this activity gave the A-level students a critical insight, and it was a memorable and creative understanding as well. Another example comes from the project that I told you about involving student teachers and school students. So we asked them to write and role as Grendel's mother, a character who remains voiceless and nameless throughout. And this drama and then writing helped to reposition the student teachers' perspectives. It was clear from their writing and role that they'd enabled a narrative switch from the male hero to the female monster's point of view. They gave voice to this nameless character, but they also considered why the character was nameless, and they thought about how Tolkien had represented how later critics had come to the text and focused on the male monsters and how little regarded this female monster was. So again, a critical dimension that was really fascinating, developed by giving this character a voice. So yeah, we're clear in our book that English is about much more than exam preparation, but we also question that notion that drama has nothing to offer in terms of preparing students for the types of writing required for terminal exams. So to illustrate this point, 2 of the young people observed in English lessons in this research were interviewed sometime after they'd done this drama in Key Stage 3. They were interviewed during the revision period for their GCSE exams, and they both remembered the insights that that doing drama had given them. One of them felt that it helped to give them attitudes to the text, which has echoes of Myra Barr's. Another that he'd felt, because he'd acted as a character and seen them through the live action, he felt confident to write about his interpretation of the character and their role in the high pressure and very individualized situation of the literature in exam. So the list on this slide summarizes the areas that I've covered here: thinking about the creative and the critical, thinking about writing in role, seizing moments to write, about crafted writing and learner agency, developing a writerly disposition, but also pedagogical artistry, what the teacher does to try to find these moments, and which makes lesson planning a lot more interesting. I didn't really talk about teacher in role, but there's that little moment where the teacher becomes the station announcer and acts as a narrator, which can also really help immerse students in the text. This whole process puts a press for language on, what Dorothy Heskett calls it that, but it helps students to tune into the text and to use language from the text and it's a very inclusive. So my conclusion now, because we're coming up to, that's nearly an hour. Yeah. So we've been arguing in our book that drama in English should be embedded across all aspects of the subject, especially reading and writing, and not just confined to a small corner of speaking and listening, which is where policymakers have long insisted that drama should be located, because drama is only mentioned on the national curriculum under English. It isn't mentioned as a discrete subject. The examples of classroom practice we highlight in our book suggest that working this way not only encourages students to think creatively, but crucially to develop a critical perspective. And we contend that this applies equally to advanced level study as it does to Key Stage 3. When approaching literary text, this means students immersing themselves in the world of the text, seeing situations, events, or characters from different perspectives, and collectively negotiating new understandings. It's an inherently inclusive pedagogy that draws on students' own lives and sets of cultural knowledge. We argue that it motivates learners by engendering playfulness and enjoyment. And given the latest findings published by the National Literacy Trust about 3 weeks ago that record a marked drop in the proportion of 8 to 18-year-olds in the UK who enjoy reading in their spare time, breathing new life into the literature curriculum seems even more pressing. Above all, as I said, this pedagogy is rightly respective of English teachers' intellectual, creative and professional expertise, and it is one which affords learners proper agency. Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do now is to, you're going to do a little task in small groups where you think about how you might do some of the kinds of drama activities that I've referred to, or any kinds of drama activities that you'd be interested in doing in your classrooms. And these can be very small. So this is the task. If you can find it in the slides that I think you have access to, but you might want to take a screenshot of that. So we're going to ask you to think about moments that lend themselves to drama. So think about a text, Jane Eyre, Telltale Heart, whichever, Jekyll and Hyde, whatever it is, any text. Consider how to introduce a character. And I'll put Heathcote's role conventions up again, so that might give you ideas. You might do a character bag, you might introduce a letter, you might get the students to create a portrait of the character, and think about how to explore context, perhaps through creation of a map or poster. That was one of the things my student teachers did. They did recruitment posters for Private Peaceful. They did maps for Romeo and Juliet. Maps are a great way of thinking about the context or location of a novel or a play or a story. Or think about opportunities to enter the fiction from different perspectives, from the point of view of a minor character or a group of people who've overheard something. You might do a whole group meeting, or you might think about a scene in pairs. I like doing whole group meetings because it's really just like doing a lesson, except you might be enrolled as chair of a residents association or something. And they can just sit at their desks, or you might, but really easy is scenes in pairs where they turn to their neighbour and they just recount something that they overheard or saw, they imagine a character overheard or saw. Or you might think of an episode. I really like doing things like this. Think about an episode that happens before or after some kind of climax. So what is happening after the kind of violence that I don't know, in one of the texts that you're teaching, a moment of silence, maybe a still image, or a moment that we think about how the characters can't bear to look at each other, or it might be a moment of dialogue where they can't bear to speak to each other, but what are the things that they manage to say? So those are often really, what's nice about those moments is they're often full of tension, so that they work dramatically, moments before or after some kind of dramatic climax. Or identify a moment where a character is about to find something out or have to make a decision. So with the Raven, it was just at the point where he was about to open the door. We wondered what might be behind it. Or they're following some news. So ask students to improvise from that moment. What is behind that door? And if you want them to improvise, then it's really good to start with a clear still image. So everyone in the same still image at a time, or think about what's the first line? What's the first line that you're going to start with? Or identify an episode in the text might be interpreted. You might take a moment from the text, but they say, well, I wonder if this happened in a different way. You might do a flashback to an event that's mentioned in a text, like the incident at Weed in Of Mice and Men, or I always like doing the characters meeting up years after the end of Romeo and Juliet or any play. And associated with this, I'll put that as a last bullet point, but I think associated with any little bit of drama, that you do. Think about opportunities for writing in role. Okay, so are there any questions about that? I will take you back. So do take a screenshot of that, and then I'll take you back to the role conventions so you can take a screenshot of those. So I'm going to take you back to the role conventions. So these are they're shortened. There's a lot more of them, but these are just some ideas. Okay. So have we got that? Is that all right? Should I stop sharing? Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem, Theo. You can stop sharing. That's fine.
Good.
Lovely. So I've got the breakouts ready. They are going to open in a moment, and you will come back here in just about 15 minutes. I think I might have put 14 just to make sure we're back in time. Like I said, there's a couple of you who might not quite be on a breakout yet.
Actually, because especially like, for example, Kamikaze, we don't hear the voice of the father that's been written about, so you could write as him and then consider his perspective, because I've really tried to use drama as a way to re-engage especially my year 11s who found like English language quite tricky, and I thought that could be a really nice way to do it.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. We don't write enough about poetry, and that's just such a lovely example. I'm trying to write it down, and you could get them to write and in that voice in a poetic way as well, couldn't you? So, and think about the language choices, and then compare it to the poem. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. Thank you for sharing that. So we've got loads. What about let's say hear from Jay Davis, Danny, and Phoebe, and then Emily, and then Eon. Off you go, Jay Davis.
There's a drama exercise where which I've used in drama classes before, and I've never thought to use in an English classroom before, where class like that are building characters will edit the facial expression and stature of the character they're playing. So like they're sort of usually doing this in little groups, and there's one person who's like frozen in role, and then the audience will then say, no, you need to be frowning a little more and you need to hunch over more. And it's such a simple game that kids love. And I've done it so many times in like youth theatres, and I've never thought to bring it into an English classroom. And
yeah,
probably
that's
just
like the example. Yeah, the example of the portrait. Definitely, it's really good. But also taking a photo or having on an iPad that you can show them is really fixes it and lovely. Yeah, you must do that. That's such a good idea to do it in, because I was thinking of a whole, when I shared you, that was a whole class, but yeah, small groups, look at each other. Then you can have a gallery of all your portraits. Yeah, sorry, is there anything more that you wanted to add?
Oh no, that was it. That was yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, you could take photos and then put them on the wall as your gallery as well, couldn't you? Because I was just saying that thing about how when you're in a still image, the reason that I like photographing and using iPads and stuff is that when you're in a still image or frozen, you can often feel quite uncomfortable because you're in an odd position. You don't know what you'll look like. You don't know what you're expressing unless others feed back, and then you get a sense of it. But it's much more engaging if you have a sense of what you look like. And actually, you in some way you are the clay for others. That's why it's interesting to get others to say, no, you need to rest your hand on your head on your hand in that way. So you get into the nuances of what it is that you want to express. And this is relevant also to drama GCSE. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. That's great. So let's go to Danny now.
Hello. There's a game we play with our year 8s, and it's really cool. We do the Crucible with them. So they read the text. We start off with there were no witches, this was hysteria. And we keep that going right the way through. And then they get to the end and we say, right, you're each going to be either a witch or a villager. To win this game, you're going to have to talk to each other, and you are going to have to get into the biggest group as possible containing only villagers. If there is a witch in your group when the timer runs out, then you have lost the game. So they immediately get up, they love interrogating each other, they get overexcited, and you can give them a timer as well just to like amp them up a bit more. They get really into sort of their roles as villagers. And then at the end, you can ask for the witches to put their hands up. And obviously, there are no witches. So you've shown them as well that they've just done exactly what happened in Salem. Like, you have just done what the citizens of Salem did. I told you something, you took it as true. Like the witchfinders told you things, you took it as true, and you've caused mayhem. And they go, oh, it's a lot of fun. They really love that. They enjoy it.
That is absolutely brilliant. I love that. And it's quite similar, it's a similar kind of idea to a brilliant drama that Gavin Bolton devised on the Crucible that I used to use, which you can find in his collected writings or in a book called Acting in Classroom Drama by Gavin Bolton. That is really, it's a great book.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, the Crucible is fantastic for drama. But what I love about that as well is that you're thinking about, it's a kind of metaphorical. It's like, this is the whole play, the structure of the play and what it's about. And you thought carefully about when you might do that activity. So you've done it at the end and you've had this question that's run through your teaching. And often I'll start some drama with I'll say this drama starts with the question. In the drama that I do about Frankenstein, I always start with, this drama starts with the question, what does it feel like to be an outsider? And then that kind of frames the activity, what they go on to doing. So I think you've really exemplified how you might, using drama, you plan it really carefully into your scheme of learning so that it really takes students somewhere in their understanding. So I love that example. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
So over to you, Phoebe.
Hi. We were having a really good discussion that ended up going off on like several tangents, but I think the crux of it was, we started off, I mentioned that I teach Jane Eyre in year 8 in our school, which can be really challenging. And we did classic, like the dating profiles for Jane and Rochester, which they sort of really get into, and they go all Love Islandy on it and stuff. And, how would Jane fare on Love Island? And then we talked about like speed dating with Rochester, Blanche and St. John and Jane, and sort of like, how really sort of getting to grips with the couples and how that sort of engages Key Stage 3. But then we got into talking about how we feel that drama in the English classroom, there's not a lot of space for it in Key Stage 4 because we become so sort of like, and the person I was having, she was fantastic. We were talking about, was saying that actually in their school that they've recently trialled introducing GCSE texts in year 9. So you're really sort of, I guess we're getting to a point where we're so exam focused that we are like losing that time and space in Key Stage 3 for exploring creativity and really building connections with texts. But one way we did talk about doing it, which was interesting, was I mentioned that I'd done like a family therapy style role play with Romeo and Juliet at a special school that I used to work in as a Hilter. But kids used to come to that special school studying different texts, so because they would be unable to access mainstream education. So young people would come in, I'm in the middle of year 11, I'm doing Macbeth, I'm in the middle of year 11, I'm doing Romeo and Juliet. So we'd get them in like a family court, and you'd have characters from Macbeth sort of debating characters from Romeo and Juliet. So when there's so many amazing ways in which we can engage pupils with drama and English in Key Stage 4 to help sort of build their sort of schema around those texts, I just feel like it's really sad that we are gradually moving towards such an exam-focused curriculum, really, that we're losing time for it. I certainly feel like there's very little time for it in the school I'm in, and I have to really like strong arm it in. But yeah, and it's sad. I feel like it's eating into Key Stage 3 now. So it was a nice start, and it's quite a depressing end to what I've got to say.
We were just talking before you came in, and like, what would be a good sort of elevator pitch for drama in English? And I was just saying about how Gemma asked me that, and I was just saying how I used to be an examiner, and I'd get loads of scripts. At a certain time, I had to, pay £2.25 per script, and just and they'd send them all together from one centre, so they all come together, and if they all read the same, you get very bored. And the exam board say continuously that they want a personal response. They want students to have a personal response. Students have to know there's a human being at the end that is marking this, who wants to hear what they have to say. They want that hearing a student's voice. It makes such a difference. And you know, you know, that what you're talking about, those different approaches, those different ways that you do when you were working in special school, you know, you have to, because otherwise those students won't necessarily access the text. But then we sort of think, oh, these students can cope if we just tell them what to do and how to do it. But maybe they can, but they not all of them. Good teaching is when you think about how can everybody access and understand this text and its complexities. And if you are being creative in your approaches, then it is something that it becomes more of a shared endeavor, and that gives them confidence. You have to have confidence to be able to write about a text in a way that, you know, really, that you can say, this is my interpretation. And it does build confidence. So thank you for that. That was great, Phoebe. Thanks very much. So shall we go to Kate?
We've got time for one more, Theo. I think Emma might have been waiting just a little while, so I might just go to Emma first, if that's okay.
Sorry, Kate. You could write it in the chat. Kate,
yeah, please do pop it in the chat.
Yeah.
We were actually discussing, so we were talking about ideas, and we came to the idea of when it's difficult to get kids to engage. So we were both saying that we were from schools where they have passes where you're not supposed to ask children questions because they have anxiety and stuff like that. So we were looking at maybe stripping it back to the basics of something like a tableau, where one person in the group is actually the director, so telling people how to stand and they contribute to their characters, and then the rest of the class guessing what part of, say, I don't know, they're doing in spectacles, what part of Act 1 is this tableau meant to represent, and why do you think that? So using it that way, so they're not necessarily having to talk as a whole class, but just in a group setting, and then the rest of the class can still engage by explaining why they think that tableau is that scene, and the kids are still having to sit themselves in a certain way and become the character to complete the tableau in the first place.
Yes, that's lovely, and I think it's really important for a play, you know, also, but because it's not just the characters, is it? It's what's around them as well. So think about the backdrop to that as well, because that helps you to locate it in you know, in the specific time and place. But also if you're thinking difficult for that, they don't all have to take on the role, and things like character bags, things where they, you know, when they can just examine something, look at an object and interpret it with this, you know, with some kind of something like that. It can be so engaging and less high stakes, as you say, for those students, but still take them into the world of the text. But one more, thank you for that. Thanks very much, Emma. One more thing that I wanted to say, one of the questions was, what's your top technique, or what's your top approach? And I was just thinking about that. I think saying, I wonder. So so what would you do tomorrow? Go into your classroom and say, I wonder what this character is really thinking about that. Or I wonder what Pip might have to say when he gets home to Joe after seeing that strange woman. I wonder what, or try to take your students into the world of the text by wondering about it, and then some ideas for some drama, for some low-key role play will suggest themselves. I think, yeah. Is there anything else that any other questions you wanted to ask me?
I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So Gemma, I don't know if you wanted to pick one or two from our question form that we've got so far.
Yeah, thank you. Theo, I think you answered the first one, like the quickest strategy to take into the classroom tomorrow. I wonder. We've had a question around...
I have to say, it's not me, it's Dorothy.
Are there any adaptations that you would make to your drama strategies if you send pupils in the class to keep them engaged and support their engagement?
I do think that sensory thing, you know, being able to handle things, being able to visualize things is really an important and inclusive thing that drama can help with. Being able to to help, help support somebody to imaginatively engage with the text. I actually had a student who couldn't see pictures in their head when they were reading. I can't remember what that's called, but that's, and she said that drama was great because it helped her to imagine because she saw it concretely in front of her. But when I do role, or I quite like doing teacher in role, so I'll slip in and out of role. I'll do it quite subtly. But if you have students who may be on the spectrum, or sometimes you have to explain, now I'm going to pretend to be someone else, or now we're going to pretend this. You might have to just be really clear. And in my experience, all students can engage in this way. All students who've had experience of play, can do this, can engage in this way. Often, too many instructions doesn't help anyone. But but you can do, everybody hears things more clearly if it's part of a story. So using a storytelling voice. And it's also, I worked a lot with bilingual learners, with people who are learning English. A storytelling voice, it helps people to understand. So yeah, do think about that. So there's some more examples here. Oh, transactional writing, but speeches, yeah. Oh, like Animal Farm is a great one for role play. And because there's the speeches and all the different perspectives of the characters. That's brilliant. This is really good. Okay.
Can I ask one more, Theo? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm conscious we've got 6 here, so I wonder if any of the questions that we don't get to ask you, we could send you via email for you to answer afterwards. Would that be okay?
Okay, yeah.
Amazing. So we've got a question here around poetry and recommendations for drama activities around poetry, particularly power and conflict poetry.
We talk, I think using images can often be with power and conflict. Poetry is all about imagery, isn't it? So I think with poetry, bringing materials in, using images, things that can help them to oh gosh, I can't. I'm trying to think of the specifics. Well, we talked a bit about the Wilfred Owen poem about shell shock and thinking about how the effects of, they're thinking about a role that students might assume as they interpret a particular poem, thinking about the effects of war and violence. Yeah, I can't think of anything more specifically, but I don't think it. Yeah, I think all poetry can lend itself to drama in particular ways, we had the great example of Kamikaze. I think that's a really great, but there's thinking of the same questions like voiceless characters or thinking from different perspectives or an image, but poetry imagery is so important. Thinking about pictures, images, still images, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that Myra Bars talks about that in her Voices and Roles, and she talks about using the punctuation. So I was thinking of when I was teaching Dulce et Decorum S, we did it via walking around the classroom as the soldiers and reading it to the punctuation so that the pupils moved in relation to the speed in which it was. So using that idea of in role to get pupils moving alongside, along with the language. So yeah, loads of great ideas, Theo. Thank you so much.
Great one for Shakespeare as well, isn't it? To walk up to the punctuation mark and then change. There's so many good examples as well for working with Shakespeare. Lots of resources available for that. Yeah, sorry. Any other questions?
There are a few, but
we have. Oh, sorry, Gemma. I'm on a bit of a lag. I was going to say, I think that might be all we have time for today, just to close the last little bits. But what we'll do is if there's any common threads of questions that have come up, we'll collate them together. And then if there's any kind of little additional words of wisdom that you have, then we'll share that as part of our follow-up email that we'll send out to all of the ECTs. Theo, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like we just got a masterclass in so many different aspects of how to engage pupils in the classroom to have authentic responses. It's been such a pleasure to have you. So thank you so much. And I think that one of the things that I would just say is, in terms of the highlights and the phrases that came out for me, was the phrases that you used of pupils authoring their own readings that feature themselves. You talked about the peopling of the text. You talked about evoking the presence of a character. You talked about enlarging the scope of canonical writing, which is absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to do in our curriculum. And I think if we all take a little bit from it, for me, it's this idea that role is another way of focusing. That's just such a beautiful way to think about it. So just a huge thank you, Theo, for everything that you've said. And for those of you who want to look more at the resources, we will share those as a follow-up as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciated that summing up, and it's been a pleasure. And good luck, everybody. Enjoy it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And so before we finish today, I just want to close by just making sure that everybody feels supported in terms of their next steps for what we've got coming ahead. So my little last very closing section is incredibly uninspirational in comparison, but I just want to make sure that everybody has some practical things that they need to take them forward into the last few weeks of term. So one of the biggest things that I just wanted to mention is just to talk about the module 4 next steps. And hopefully when we think about some of those lovely sound bites that we've taken from Theo's session, and I've just captured them on the screen there, I hope that you can really see the transferable nature of what we've talked about today, and actually the fantastic work that you are doing in these module 4 assignments. It is so prevalent and so important, and hopefully has given you some inspiration and some reinvigorated excitement. So just a little reminder then that this is where we're at the moment in terms of our assignment work. You have submitted, or hopefully had the chance to submit, a proposal for your module 4 that has outlined your potential plans for one of the 4 different aspects of inclusion in your practice. And the next thing to look forward towards is the 3rd of February, where you will be submitting a sample of your assignment. Okay, so in order to support you with this, you will be receiving, if you haven't already, your feedback in the coming weeks from BSU. And remember that you get a comment with some advisories and next steps. In order to support you with this, I just wanted to signpost 2 things. First of all, you have an optional drop-in session. Thank you so much to those of you who come to those sessions and ask really, really important questions. We really value it. This space is going to be, if you read your feedback and you have initial questions, then please do come along to that drop-in. But also conscious that some of you might have had to submit your proposal a little bit later. You might have had a different submission deadline, and so you might not actually have your feedback in that window. And so if so, we are also going to be doing some module 4 assignment support as part of our 2nd online English training day, which is this Thursday, the 12th of December, and there will be an assignment support session on criticality and your writing as well. So there's a wealth of support available, and that will be, obviously this has been a big group today because we've had our subject matter experts. That day will be in your smaller groups with a number of SDLs, so there will be space for you to kind of ask questions and to have some of your own reflection time as well. And then we'll also be popping in a drop-in in January if maybe you've come over some things during the winter break that you want to ask when it's maybe a bit fresher in your mind in the new year. So I just wanted to signpost that support is available. But if you have any questions, worries or concerns, as always, please do email your SDL. We're always incredibly happy to support and to help you. So if you are thinking about what those next steps might be, or you want some support in terms of what that route map looks like, there are some next steps on the slide. A reminder that we will be sharing with you all of the resources from today, which will include all of the links from both of our subject matter expert sessions, and we'll also include this little checklist. So please don't feel that you have to make notes on that now. But the key thing is, as always, in the bottom right-hand side, any questions or worries about your Module 4 assignment, please do speak to your subject development lead. And at the end of these slides, when you scroll through them on the SharePoint folder that you will have been sent and also will get sent again after this session, you will also see some additional resources to support you with kind of topics to do with ethics, collating evidence and data. And we will be focusing on data and impact in a future training day as well, but it's there if you're already in those stages. So please do review those. I think that brings us to the end of today's seminar afternoon. I'm very conscious that some of you have had to hot foot from a lesson straight into the seminar. So a reminder that we do have our recording available should you need it. Thank you so much for your time, your engagement, and the wonderful ideas that you've shared with us today. I hope that you go away with at least 1 or 2 examples of things that you want to implement in your classroom tomorrow. And as your subject development leads, we really look forward to hearing about it. So thank you so much. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you on the 12th of December. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.